Excellent. We're back at the reception desk. And who do we have joining us now? We have Ruben checking in. Ruben is going to host us through our Black Swan game today. Welcome, Ruben, to the Inn. We're looking forward to spending some time with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what we'll be up to?
Thank you. Well, good morning, afternoon, or night, everyone. I know we have everybody joining us from all corners of the world. We still have to do something about Antarctica, though. But I want to welcome you all to today's Black Swan game. I work across a range of fields. Some of you know my work in terms of using technology in education, the SAMR model, in terms of how you use technology to actually make a difference in education, as opposed to have it be a really fancy typewriter. But in this context, we're going to be talking a little bit about a different type of project I work on. And these are projects that relate to thinking about anti-fragile design. They are projects that relate to saying, well, how do we design so that when a Black Swan event occurs, we don't just barely make it through, or unfortunately don't make it through. Instead, we come out at the very least resiliently, the way we were before. But even better, we can come out in an anti-fragile manner. And an anti-fragile manner means that we come out the other end of the Black Swan event better than we did before. Now, that's difficult. It's challenging, and it's not the sort of thing you can say on the fly, well, suddenly I'm going to come up with anti-fragile solutions. You can try, but usually you need to be working on this ahead of time. And that's the purpose of today's work. So I've been, for the past year, the Innovator in residence here at ASU and in the context of the ShapingEDU project. And I've been working on developing the whole tool set for thinking about Black Swans and thinking about anti-fragility. And if you go to the ShapingEDU website, you'll find an entry for the Black Swan project, and you'll find multiple videos, resources, materials that have been created over the course of the year. But today, we're going to be doing something just a little bit different. We're going to be playing a game simulation, if you will, of Black Swan thinking. We're going to set the stage for an event, as you're going to see, that we're going to say happens in the not too distant future. We'll come back to that in a second. And then you're going to break up into teams that will deal with this event. So with that in mind, then, let's think a little bit about what this future might look like. After the flu pandemic of 2023, the response was not great, but at least it was somewhat informed by the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that was not exactly a Black Swan event. It was predictable that other pandemics would occur, but the handling wasn't great. However, the space event of 2030 was a completely different story. In 2030, suddenly out of nowhere, an asteroid appeared. And well, the good thing is at least it fragmented before hitting Earth. Had it hit in one piece, well, we won't be having this conversation at all, of course. But when it fragmented, it divided up into multiple pieces that each of them created, well, roughly a Tunguska level event. If you're familiar with Tunguska, that's roughly, you're talking about a few megatons. Now the good news is none of the fragments hit a major population center, but nonetheless, when you have the equivalent of multiple nuclear bombs going off across the world, disruption is severe, and the loss was huge, even dwarfing what occurred during COVID. So one thing that struck people is that, if only a few $1 million had been spent on maintaining the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, well, it would have helped predict this event and maybe allow people to do something ahead of, maybe deviate the asteroid, or at the least fragment it into smaller pieces. But since it was allowed to collapse for want of a regular maintenance budget, well, suddenly trillions of dollars in loss of everything occurred. And well, it was decided after that, maybe, just maybe, barely, don't get me wrong, this wasn't by all means a universal consensus position. Maybe it would be worthwhile to create some sort of a Black Swan observatory, some sort of a community dedicated to thinking about anti-fragility, dedicated to thinking about how to respond and how to prevent, not the Black Swan, you can't prevent the Black Swan, you can't predict it, but certainly prevent the worst side effects, how to come out of Black Swan events at least resiliently, preferably anti-fragile. And this community was decided to center it around the creation of a series of alternative universities based upon the work of David Staley a decade prior to the unfortunate meteorite event. And one of the things that David did was outline 10 alternative universities that each of them looked at things, thinking about academia as speculative design, thinking about how it could be really different. So it was decided to use the 10 universities as the seeds for this design, and then invite groups to propose that they would create these universities, but mixing and matching a little bit with one of the universities already, as the base for the design, and then adding bits and pieces of a different alternative university into the mix. So that was part of the decision. It was decided, wait a second, you're going to have all these universities in a community. You just have a K-12 system to feed into it that can actually, that has students that can actually participate in these very unusual entities as part of the Black Swan prediction labor. And one of the things then is that, if that's the case, what else could you have? Well, you might have some not-for-profit organizations and some technology startups that might also chip into the picture. So that was decided that in addition to the universities, you'd have, of course, the K-12 system and some not-for-profits and some of these tech startup companies. And that's where you come in, because that's what you're going to be doing today. You're going to be creating these alternative universities, designing them first. And then in Act 2, something might happen. Maybe something did happen. It could happen that would use the skills developed in this community. And who knows what might happen in Act 3? Maybe. But, it's the sort of thing you find out best by actually doing things. So here's how we're going to do things. You're going to break up into self-selected communities. You're going to choose what you'd like to do. We like to do an alternative university. We'd like to design a K-12 system. Maybe you'd prefer to work on a not-for-profit, maybe on a startup. All of those are going to be options for you. So you're going to see that we have breakout rooms set up, and you're going to self-select which ones you'd like to go to. Do you want to go to an alternative university, work with other people on creating alternative universities? In that case, go to one of the ones that's labeled HED, short for higher ed, and then you'll have a number and a letter. And you'll find out more what the number and letter correspond to later on. But those are all the alternative universities. Would you prefer to work on the K-12 school? Those are all labeled K-12 ed and then a number, not-for-profit, NFP and a number, and technology startup company, TSC and a number. So you can pick which one you'd like to go participate in the task for. And the one thing we're going to do, I'm looking, let's see, how many people do we have here today? We have about 67 people. So what we're going to do is we're going to limit how many people in each room. And given this number of participants today, we're going to say it's going to be 7 people per room. So if you go into a room and you already have 7 people there, go to the next room. We're not going to make it 100% strict. So if you absolutely want to work with a group and they're up to 7 and you're number 8, okay, we'll let that fly. But please try to see if you can have break rooms that are at around or under 7, because that's a good number. It's a good number to get some conversations going, to get the juices flowing, to get people thinking about this. All right. Once you're in the room, you're going to find that you have access to a Jamboard, and you're going to have access to a document that will tell you something more about the task you're going to undertake in each act of today's game. And you're also going to have access to a document that you actually were sent yesterday, but we'll make sure you have access to it today as well, which has additional background information on Black Swan games. So that's the setup for what's happening today. As I say, it's now the year, we're now past the year 2030, and we're beginning to see that if we're going to be serious about Black Swans, well, we have to play games with them. So each act of the game is going to last about an hour and a half. And then we're going to have a period where you're going to be, at the end of each act, you're going to have a sheet filled out with some information about what you did with your design. And we're going to use that as the basis for a feedback process for a sharing out of the products. We'll get to more of that later. But at this point, I think we're getting ready to move into the breakout rooms. So, Laura, is there anything else I should mention at this point? Or are we ready to tell people how to go to the breakout rooms?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll chime in and say, besides we're so glad you're here, is that I know a couple of you have reached out to express concern that you have to pop to another meeting in the middle of the day today. Not to worry. We hope you can join us for as much of the day as possible, but we know that that doesn't work for everyone. So if you have to hop away, you're always welcome to come back. We've designed this game to be flexible and allow for people moving into and out of it as their schedules allow. That's it for me, Ruben. Back to you.
All right. If that's the case, let me ask if anybody has any questions in the chat before we begin. You'll notice that Laura has put in a link to the Jamboards, and you have a link to the Act 1 materials. So we have those already ready to go. And as I said, you now know the types of breakout rooms. Again, HED for one of the alternative universities, K-12 for a K-12 school, NFP for a not-for-profit, and TSC for a tech startup company. All right. Any questions? Do I have any instructions for how the group work should be organized? Yes, the documents that you have in those folders, for each act, you're going to have a document that will describe to you further how the questions you'll be addressing and how the group work should be organized. So in the very first stage in this act, you're going to be working at the creation stage. You're designing what this alternative university, K-12 startup company or not-for-profit looks like. And you're going to have some parameters on that. And all of those are in the document. It'll be easier if you read it rather than having me, read all of the possible alternatives here, and then, A, bore a lot of people by droning on, and B, having you not remember which one is. So does it matter which higher ed group you join? You're going to find that the number corresponds to a particular approach to an alternative university, but it doesn't matter. Right now, what I would recommend is that you find a group of, another 6 like-minded people, or not like-minded, however it is, and gather there. And again, the document will tell you how the number corresponds to a different alternative university, what's already been decided for you in that context, where you still have some room for decision-making and proposals that you could make. Let's see, I'm looking at this material. What else do we have? Melissa, you don't have a breakout room option on your menu. I'm not sure why that would be the case.
Sometimes that's
okay.
just the Zoom version, and just let us know what room you want to go in and we can move it.
Okay, great. So we'll just move you there. Yeah, that's not a problem. And again, we've tried to keep things as simple as possible. When I do this type of game in person, I usually have a central table with a big map of the location where the organizations are supposed to be, and encourage people to walk around and so on. We're trying to recreate as much as we can of that in Zoom without creating too much complexity for people when you're doing this. All right. So let's see, it's almost 9 o'clock Pacific Standard, Arizona time, etc. So MT. So If everybody is ready, I think I'm ready to say let's open up the rooms and have people start going there. Stephanie, anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I think we're all excited to get started. Let's dive into a room.
Wonderful. And I'll be wandering through the rooms, as will other facilitators, and we'll have more to say both during your work in the rooms as well as when we reconvene here for sharing the products. So really looking forward to this. See you all in the workspace.
And welcome everybody back to the main room. We're going to do a recap of what you guys have been up to, and Ruben's going to guide us through that. So Ruben, take us away.
All right. Well, first, I wanted to thank everybody for their wonderful work this morning or afternoon or wherever it is you're at. Since we're talking about transporters, I really now think we need to start talking star dates. So, but we've got the 5 groups that have worked on higher ed, the alternative university scenarios, one that has worked on a not-for-profit and one that has worked on a startup tech company. So that's a nice range and diversity of approaches. All right. So what I would like to ask is for whoever is the representative for each of the groups to come to the foreground, as we call them up, and explain very briefly what your design was, how you thought about it. Remember, we'll all have access to your 5-second pitch and the rest of the write-up. So at this point, think more about how you can summarize this quickly and make evident at least some of the thought process, some of the discussion that went on in your group. That'll be among the things that will be most useful to the rest of the teams moving forward. And I am going to keep people on a fairly tight schedule because I want to make sure that we start with Act 2 on time. So I'm going to ask everybody to keep it to, let's say we have 7 groups, so we're going to say 5 minutes or less per group. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to be quiet and ask for somebody from higher ed group 1A to come forward.
Maybe we can go to a different group, Ruben, and then come back to that group.
Yep, let's come back. So from group 2 then.
Hi, that's me, Josh Allen.
Right.
I'm representing Group 2. We had a very awesome discussion on our micro college. So our micro college is Learn to Learn Academy. And what this is it's led by cognitive scientists, and they are going to help you learn how to learn in preparation for your future career or future study. In the words of Ari Degas, a business theorist, the ability to learn faster than your competitors may be the only sustainable competitive advantage. And so our idea is we're going to teach you complex problem solving, sense making, imagination, multimodal communication, cross-cultural competencies, focusing on critical thinking, perspective taking, creativity, entrepreneurship, and growth mindset. Obviously, this is we're going to be very flexible and adaptable in our spaces, and we want to allow our cognitive scientist leaders to move and be free to teach in any mode, any location that they feel appropriate. So that is our Learn to Learn Academy.
Wonderful. So very quickly, I very much like this design. If I were representing the funders for Arecibo, I would say this is definitely a worthwhile component of the alternative universities. I particularly like that aspect that you say, working with students to learn how to learn. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be an important aspect as you go into the 2nd and 3rd stage of this Black Swan process. So keep in mind, think about when we go into Acts 2 and 3, when you start using this, how that learn to learn component, how that learn to learn aspect is going to come to play a role in the foreground, how you're going to use it to address the specific challenges that, oh, I'm sorry, I should be quiet now. Spoilers about the future, dear. Anyhow, but that's a very powerful aspect. I also like the fact that when you specified city blocks, you talked about flexible and adaptive spaces. That's to me, it's always one of the reasons that the map is included in the game, and that question is there, is it helps people think about, well, what does this look like in a tangible sense? Sometimes it's easy to go off into the stratosphere and not think about the fact that colleges, universities sometimes have buildings, and sometimes they have buildings for the reason that, well, all the other universities and colleges had this building too, so therefore we must have one of those. And I like the fact that you're in fact saying, no, not necessarily. And you have a plaza, for instance, which I like very much. The idea, I've actually seen some very successful designs that use plaza type spaces across really the entire, not just in higher ed, but also in K-12, to stimulate this type of cross-disciplinary interactions that seem to occur there. So kudos on that as well. And again, I'm going to encourage other people later to read through this. I will be compiling all of these, but I like the fact that you've included the brainstorming here as well, because that's a valuable component of this. So thank you so much. And at this point, let's move on to the next group. So how about group 3A then?
Hey there, this is Angie, and I am going to pitch our ideas. So our task was so our institution name is, sorry, just a second. So we are a humanities think tank, and our name is the Newton Humanities Institute of Advanced Play. And so this is our pitch. We aspire to be a playful, inclusive, diverse, humanities-based sandbox, designing practical products that foster positive change in the communities we serve. We operate following a mentoring culture to foster valuable intersections. And I probably should add that our agents are also, other than students and specialists, but also marginalized groups. And to add to what the previous group said, we also thought of a open space, collaborative space.
Wonderful. That's a really good place to start. Let me ask you a question. I'd love to hear a little bit more. I like very much the expression you used to call it the sandbox. I like the expression sandbox, and I like how you use it in this context. So can you play that out a little bit more? Explain a little bit some more of the thinking around that, because I think that's a particularly powerful and valuable aspect of this discussion.
I think that maybe somebody else can help me in here, but we, I think that that relates to the word playful that we used, playful. So a place where we invite people to pitch their ideas that are related to some problems they might have, and we are, yeah, it's a place for imagining and playing around with ideas and tools. And maybe someone can help me from the group to expand further.
I don't think Brent is here, so if you want me, I'll leap in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the idea is we thought of having one of the reasons we didn't pick a location on the map is that this is a very distributed organization. And we exist primarily in, well, we think that's more anti-fragile, because if you put a building somewhere, it can get destroyed, right? So, but we would have various meeting locations around the world, but also potentially in VR space as well, where we can bring in people as necessary based on their expertise to be a part of our working groups. And the other thing that one of the things, the reason we have a sandbox is it's, we want to be playful, but also we had considered the idea that every year, every group has to reinvent itself. That doesn't mean that this is a judgment exercise. That doesn't mean that, you failed, you need to do this differently or anything like that. It's that literally you stop and you start from step one again and say, if we were starting right now based on what we've done, but if we were starting right now as a new group, what would we want to include, and who would we want to include? So that would be part of an annual exercise for every working group. And that's a play exercise in the sense that we're playing with ideas that we may have missed, don't have tunnel vision as a result of, working on the same problem for the same year.
Wonderful, thank you. And again, I want to encourage other groups as well to listen to this aspect of the sandbox, the play in the sandbox. We talk a lot. We've talked a lot in recent years about the games and gameful design. I prefer, by the way, the term gameful design much more to gamification. Gamification, for me, always sounds a little bit like somebody's being pushed through a machine that gamifies them or something like that. Not my favorite image. But there's also an aspect in which play that's less structured than a game is valuable, and that's the aspect of the sandbox. I always encourage people to think about things. Think of, for instance, Lego blocks, right? When you're talking about using Lego blocks don't form a game. I mean, you can build a game around Legos, don't get me wrong. So everybody build their own Lego car, we'll roll them downhill. Whoever has the car reach the bottom of the hill first wins. But it's also the aspect of, I don't know, I'm going to play with this, right? The idea of a sandbox is an important one, and it's a crucial one when we're thinking about anti-fragility. It's crucial because one of the problems is if you constrain yourself to not have the openness of the sandbox from the very beginning, you're going to start missing things. You're going to say, well, the rules of the game are X, Y, and Z, and that can be very useful at times. But sometimes you don't see that the rule of the game is actually what's pushing you into a non-anti-fragile design. And saying, let me subtract out the rules for a bit. Yeah, exactly, Tom. Your sandcastle will get kicked over, right? And so you can say, well, okay, let me play with the Lego blocks. Let me play with the bucket of sand. And that idea of a sandbox is an important and a valuable one. And also, I like the fact that, by the way, you decided not to cite into a single specific location. Now, you mentioned a building can be destroyed and go away. That's true, but think about what we've seen with COVID, right? A single location is fragile for a lot of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with the building went away or the building was destroyed. It simply is the building is there, but nobody has an easy way to get to it, or it's not safe to be in the building, or the building is too expensive to run. We saw this over and over and over again, where people had a conflict between saying we must keep the building going and other people saying, well, but the building is holding us back. So, starting to think, it's not that buildings don't have functions. It's not that buildings don't have usefulness, but sometimes buildings can actually lead to fragility. And diversifying, saying, well, the building is useful here, but not there. How much do I want to invest in that building? What will that do to my later stages when I try to apply the design? That's important too. And sometimes having a single location can be extremely fragile. Think of all the schools that said, we will bring in great scholars from all over the world, very worthwhile goal, diversify your outlook, diversify culture, but you say, and we build it and we put them all inside this one building. Ouch. That did not work real well with COVID now, did it? Because, well, you could bring them in virtually, but if you were so obsessed with the building, that really did not work. So that's the type of profile, the type of picture you want with this. So thank you so much. And let's move on to the next group. So let's go to group 4. Who would like to speak for group 4?
Hey there, I'm the group 4 rep. Awesome. So, I don't see myself yet. Okay. All right. So group 4, our main challenge was to build a university around the idea of nomad university model, where students are engaged in projects and project-based learning in different places for maybe 6 to 9 months. And there's no permanent physical location of the university. But we chose to mold that in with primarily the polymath concept and a little bit, just a sprinkling from the liberal arts college as well, because we thought that those themes of an interdisciplinary approach to learning with the polymath, taking a major from 3 different areas, sciences, arts and humanities, and professional track, as well as the the workforce and the real critical thinking skills that are discussed in the liberal arts track is what we would need to make this nomadic university experience work really well for us. So our goal here in our university is to set students on a path to workforce and academic success in our ever-changing global environment. We're also thinking of hopefully doing this internationally. And our pitch is that students will acquire essential 21st century skills through a series of immersive, interdisciplinary, and professionally grounded apprenticeships in partnership with global communities. And that was the other part that was really important to us, that in every way that we can, these 6-month apprenticeships where students would be working in faculty in different locations throughout the globe would be immersed in those local communities and solving for a community need, if at all possible, and really grounded in the work that was already being done there and the community that they could be serving. So I think that's most of it. Because we are, our model is nomadic, we aren't thinking of a permanent building location, but we did specify that we'd love to have regular meetups of our student body, hopefully in partnership with these, community collaborations at local establishments, things like that.
Yeah, Burning Man. Now there's a thought. I think I'm going to not follow that one too far. Interesting, but not quite sure what the consequences might be. All right, so thank you again. Again, this is a really intriguing design. Let me start with the last item, the aspect of using the community itself as a basis for the partnerships and so on. This is something that I always encourage that people explore further in terms of their thinking, because sometimes you say, well, it's a community partnership, but you look at it and it's not so partnershipy as much as it is that, well, we will give something to this entity in the community, or we will have some common project, but the partnership aspect is less a partnership and more a question of A gives to B, and that's about it. So again, your design says, no, let's step away from that. Let's think carefully, let's think seriously about a design that not only involves partnerships with the community, in fact, it can't help but do so. It's designed so that you have no choice in some ways, but to have these partnerships with the community. So that's another important aspect of this. And the other element that I wanted to highlight is, as you're going forward, you'll see what happens. Something's going to happen. Yes, I guess something's going to happen in Acts 2 and 3. But the polymath aspect might be particularly powerful there. Some people will speak about the power and the options due to specialization. But start thinking deeply about what polymath means. You've got this in your design already. Think about what that opens up. Think about the possibilities it opens up that are not available to a more specialized design, to a more traditional design. So let's keep that, I would recommend that you keep that in your mind as you're moving forward. And one of the other aspects that I liked here, that again, I want to encourage people to read your summary because it's an important aspect, is the question of faculty labor. So, the question that it's not, the faculty are not this entity that just sort of exists in a vacuum, but actually has a need for help. There's a question of how you think about labor in the context of faculty. That's very important. That's something that in terms of all of these designs, as you're thinking about these alternative universities, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking of your faculty as these sort of angels descended from on high that do not need food or lodging or anything else. It's a question of how all of that fits, all of those requirements, all of those demands fit within the case of the design. And again, think about how that can be not just a demand, but where perhaps it can support new options, new alternatives, because sometimes people just view that as well, it's something that you have to deal with, but it can also be a point for building out. So just some thoughts here. More to come once we go through Acts 2 and 3. All right, thank you again so much. Can we go on to Group 5 then for higher education?
Hi, I'm going to be talking for Group 5. I feel like obligatory. Sorry, my camera's off and I have a baby on my lap, so she might wake up and cry, but that ain't it. Okay, so I'm really enjoyed our group and I'm hoping to do all of our thoughts justice. So I'll just kind of dive in. Our institution's name is Seoul University. Our primary theme was as a liberal arts college. I know you all read the materials, but just a quick refresh. We're focusing on 7 key skills of complex problem solving, sense making, imagination, multimodal communication, cross-cultural competency, and leadership. And we are based on month-long courses with a semester-long apprenticeship in each focus area. For our sub theme, we considered the platform university model, which is permeable with respect to students and faculty and emergent academic structures. So we're thinking about connecting different stakeholders in various ways. So our quick pitch, let's see. So Seoul University provides learners with an expanding galaxy of future-proof skills and a constellation of work-based learning experiences. We are an ability-centered field institute connecting our present futures, training students for real-world employment, and grounding students with a humanities education. We bring the learning and support to you. So for this consideration of the how many city blocks, we agree that having a set location is problematic. And so we thought about this as maybe having a field campus with the ability to pop up in areas for a set amount of time and instruct, but also offering multimodal and asynchronous and synchronous options, e-learning and physical nodes for support, collaboration, shared experiences, think tanks, or assessment. We do think that having a physical space is important, but having the e-learning space is also important. So we also liked the idea of potentially having a core headquarters or a resilience center with support for work and learning spaces. And then we wanted to keep open additional land for future eco-friendly development designed for portside and gateway functions and off-world launch and landing, problem solving, and interstellar professional development. So some of the, I just wanted to highlight, we have a lot more to say, of course, but I'm just going to highlight some of the key components we considered. Our strong relationship development between between employers and the school. Strong advising and coaching with a self-discovery team to support students with both physical and social survival skills. A key component of portfolio skills, artifacts, and reflections so that students are taking away learning experiences that are meaningful to them. And then having the school as a coordinator of coaching and experiences, supporting learning, broad topics and skills, theory, and research. And then our final key component is seamless transitions between virtual and physical. I'm like, oh, if it already exists, Tom, I need to look it up. So I think that's us. So thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. So, all right. So let me ask you a quick question here in terms of how you're thinking about this. Again, I like the question of the future-proof skills and the work-based learning experiences, right? So one of my questions then becomes, when you're thinking about this, when you're thinking about how all these pieces fit together, how do you bring the work experience itself into the institution? In other words, one of the things is that I like to distinguish between scenarios where you have apprenticeship programs. The work experience happens, but it happens primarily outside of an institution, right? Here you're talking about something deeper. So perhaps let me, if you have a moment, if I can get you to talk a little bit more to that, because what you're talking about in terms of the ability centered, in terms of how you're thinking about the work learning spaces, is you're talking about bringing this more into the university itself. So could you talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about that?
I will try. So I think the way that we are thinking about this is we can't necessarily predict what the future is going to look like. And this has led to a problem where I think somebody in our group specifically mentioned a 10-year gap between what the market needs and what schools are training to. And so by trying to have stronger relationships with current employers, so this is our future employers, of course, that we can help students go out and experience real-time marketplace learning. So what employers need today, and that would be based on the relationships we have with big employers in the area, those who are working and looking for people with on-demand skills, I suppose, essentially. Am I saying this right? So we were discussing circumstances where the university is bringing the learning into the work experiences. So then while students are off learning with their employers, that we are still grounding them in an education based in the humanities, so based in social and physical survival skills.
Wonderful, thank you. That makes it very clear. And again, as the other groups are thinking about, as you're thinking about the challenges to be posed in Acts 2 and 3, this is another important aspect, right? Because the relationship, we don't have today people playing entities such as particular workplaces. We have one startup and one not-for-profit, but it's not necessarily the same as the workplaces that you'd be working with. In a, if we were doing this over a matter of not just one day, but multiple days, we might indeed bring in more groups to role play, more different groups, almost groups with competitive claims upon attention and so on. But this is another important aspect. How do you think, as you're moving forward, as you're developing what you're doing and how you're doing, how does it play into that environment? So Acts 2 and 3, I don't know what they're going to be about, but whatever it is, there's going to be a workplace. And you're going to be thinking about that institution not playing into an absence of context for a workplace, but actually an actual workplace itself. And again, it's not just a question of supplying a need. It's a question of a much more dynamic relationship if you're trying to build in anti-fragility, because otherwise, you've pointed out correctly, you always wind up with the weird lags of, we have this, but nobody in the workplace can use this, or conversely, the workplace needs this, but we don't have any education programs that relate to it. So this type of synergy is important moving forward. So thank you. All right, moving right along then. So we can finish all the university groups. Do we have somebody from Group 1A now ready to briefly present on that group's work?
Hey, everybody. Sorry that I missed the call for the first report out, but I'm here now. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about what our group discussed, and then I would invite any other members of our 1A group to jump in and correct me and give all the rest of the brilliance that we discussed. So our alternative university was Platform University, which was, if you'll recall from the homework that some of us did and some of us didn't, was permeable with respect to students and faculty, had emergent academic structures, was about allowing for organically grown and unregulated interactions, right, as a space. So the name of our institution that we landed on was Unbound, Think, Do, Learn, Repeat. We talked about how our platform university would intersect well with two sub-themes. First was polymath, the polymath idea. Second was liberal arts in the specific definition that was provided in our homework for liberal arts college. Polymath because we felt that the open and unstructured nature of the platform would be well complemented by the sense of cross-disciplinarity in polymath, and allowing a little bit of structure and a little bit of kind of architecting learning pathways paired with a lot of flexibility, a lot of customization, right? So we felt that there would be some nice harmony between those two things. And we also thought of liberal arts college as a second sub theme, because we felt that the modularity and the skills-based approach to the way that liberal arts college was framed, number 5, as an alternative university, fit well with the logic of the platform, where learners could form their own constellations of learning experiences, form their own pathways, and then derive value incrementally along those pathways, as opposed to just being in sort of one linear path. So that was where we kind of landed with the intersections between platform and polymath and the liberal arts college idea. So our 5-ish second pitch was that Unbound is a freestanding platform that recognizes connections and pathways to multiple endpoints that can be overlapping, can contain and be destinations in and of themselves, and can focus on multiple modes of interaction and communal engagement. This platform allows learners to make all forms of their learning, both current and prior, visible, such that co-creation and engagement spark as interactions increase and diversify. We talked in terms of space, the idea of being unbounded was what gave us the name. So we didn't choose a particular number of city blocks. We're imagining this as a largely software-driven platform that exists in a kind of open source community authored mode that will have its primary modes of interaction be virtual, but that may also either through organic relationships that form on the platform or through prompts in the learning experiences on the platform, connect to existing community spaces or other local entities that are relevant or co-located with learners and education providers. So we really are thinking about this as a virtual platform that people can interact with virtually or interact with in their local contexts and communities. So there were a number of ideas that our group discussed. I'm not sure that I will do justice to certainly all of them, maybe not many of them, but a couple I wanted to call attention to. So modularity was one, the sense of allowing combination and recombination of different types of learning experiences that learners can derive value from in and of themselves, whether or not they contribute to a larger cluster or credential or even what we might define as a degree. Another was connectivism. So the foundational logic of the platform is connections and interactions that are both grounded in individual learning experiences, but are also have as their foundation co-creation of those learning experiences, co-creation of the educational content that drives those experiences, and the interactions that might derive from them. So really the idea behind Unbound is creating a space where there's flexibility and personalization for learners. There's a broad spectrum of offerings from education providers, and there's as little mediating factors between learners and learning and the value they get from that, whether that's job outcomes or credentials, as possible. So I want to take a moment before our time is up to just invite anyone else from the group that was part of the conversation to elaborate or correct anything that I've said.
I'll just add in terms of also the connectivism, the idea of constructivism too, bringing in Dewey, that the students are coming in with knowledge from other places as well, and we want to honor that knowledge as well as give them the connections to kind of go forward.
And really good, Chris. The other thing was just why this matters for Anti-Fragile. That platform we were attracted to for various different reasons, but what we were thinking about is the challenge to higher ed is fluctuations in the number of learners or the educators, and the amount of overhead required with that to scale up and down. And in a scenario where a country or space is divided by these asteroid, you would need to flex in scale up and down without going out of business. And so for the pitch to the business providers, it would be a minimal platform that allows for these connections so that you could scale up and down or draw from different volumes or different segments of learners and educators.
Wonderful, thank you. That's a lovely setup to wrap up the set of 5, alternative universities. I think you've done a great job of summarizing all the key components here. I do like the idea of the unbounded one, and taking a sideways step for a second, I think there's some fascinating possibilities, leaving aside what's going to happen in Acts 2 and 3, to take this conceptual design and to say, well, what does this mean, for instance, if we think about it now in terms of some of the current world concerns, whatever you want to call them, relative to competencies-based education. How does this interplay? What can it do? So again, this is, to take it out for a second out of Black Swan territory into, less Black Swanish, but still crucial territory. There are some very interesting implications there. So thank you. All right. We have 2 more groups left. So if I can get the not-for-profit group to come up and talk a little bit about their design.
Hey there, I think I'm the only one online for my group, so I'm sorry you're stuck with me. I think you're going to be really excited with what this nonprofit organization is willing to offer you all, though. We are called Fill the Gap. We know that life skills are necessary to bring objectives and people together, and Fill the Gap wants to facilitate finding and filling those needs for you. We want to provide students with internships, certifications, field experience opportunities, and employers with students to fit their different needs. Maybe not students in air quotes, but finding whatever those gaps are and filling those gaps with people, skills, and everything else that we need to work together. If you're going to give us a city block, we're going to take it and use the space to facilitate our meetings and our work, but we'd also like to have some satellite offices, lots of different spaces, campuses, employers, government offices, for mobile field units that can be deployed to help facilitate identifying those gaps and filling them in different crises, and also visual gatherings so that we have as many resources that we can bring together for everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. And one of the very interesting things to me is that you're thinking about a type of work skills approach, the type of internships approach in the context of something that will play out with anti-fragility and Black Swans. That's a very different type of context than a more traditional job finding, assisting, not-for-profit, right? So you've got some very interesting things going on there, in the sense of saying, well, we are not just trying to find the job that already exists and trying to shoehorn somebody into this. You're trying to look at something and say, hey, a Black Swan situation has created some opportunities. How do we, instead of just going for the traditional job, look at creating the type of job synergies, if you will, between those people looking for the job in the job market and what's being generated. So what you have here, when people sometimes ask me and say, look, Ruben, but wait a second, how can you have a true anti-fragile situation arising from a Black Swan? You've just described exactly the type of scenario that can lead to that, because you're not just looking at saying, let's do the same job placement we've always done. Okay, and some agencies are very good at doing that. Don't get me wrong. That's not don't ever do that. But here you're talking about saying, something that happened, it may be horrific, whether it's COVID or the space event or who knows what's coming in parts Acts 2 and 3. But this doesn't mean you wanted that Black Swan to occur. But since you're going through it, some things are going to come out better than they were before. Some new opportunities, some matches that would never have occurred, where somebody was saying, this person's skills don't match any existing job, so we're just kind of, get them there so they can have a living, but nobody's very happy with it, right? You're saying, no, hold on, there are opportunities for new creations here. And we saw, it's one of those cases where we saw a little bit of that occasionally in some scenarios in the context of COVID, but I wish we'd seen more. And in fact, that might be, oh, no, we're not in Act 2 yet. We'll come
And I
back to
think
that
too,
later.
we can help. We did struggle as a group with, okay, well, what institution are we going to be supporting? And instead of bounding ourselves and our work to one institution, we actually are bringing all those pieces together. And the more pieces that our organization is working to bring together, the better the work that we're doing, the more people we're serving, and the more gaps we're filling.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. All right. In the last few minutes, we have the startup group. So
I'm here. I just was going to defer to Shimi, but generally think her idea led the way, and Debbie's here too, so we can kind of iterate a brief kind of overview of what we did. So we have an idea that I think comes out of some of Shimi's experience of a startup that is really kind of something like a course or content producer that's really creating transdisciplinary kind of scenario and challenge-based learning for students aimed primarily kind of in the K-12 space, almost as a scaffolding or a foundation for deeper analytical work, but really kind of starting to learn in a transdisciplinary kind of challenge-based way to solve problems. So we had a number of concepts that we were aiming for, but you could imagine one that would challenge students to find a way to travel the globe using kind of putting parameters on the kinds of transportation they could take. So no plane. So how might you get from Johannesburg, South Africa to Beijing without the use of a plane? And then along the way, as you kind of travel, then you're encountering challenges, not wholly different from some of the Black Swan challenges that might emerge, but including elements of culture, geopolitics, or even kind of budgeting, any of the pieces that would be required for such a journey. Then along the way, you're kind of encountering those as challenges. And we might think about how humanistic values come into play. And so what purpose are you traveling for? What would it mean to have a zero carbon footprint on such a journey or something like that? Or what are some of the other constraints you might put on, really just as a way for students to kind of engage in learning in a new way? And we thought that this would partner well, or might be in support of a kind of a micro college situation where you might have an apprentice type relationship, or there might be some sort of small learning experience where teams are in cohorts. But even listening to Chelsea talk about kind of like nomadic university, that might be something that could come into play there. But essentially, that was the idea of essentially an online institute or a content developer that offered those kinds of experiences. And then ideally, this is online. That's kind of probably a distributed or remote organization with teams of developers, and you need lots of different roles in there. So that's a much shorter synopsis, I think, of some of the other groups have gone, but that's kind of the gist. I don't know, Debbie, if you're here, if there's anything you would augment to kind of what I've shared here, or even Ruben, as you were in listening to us, anything you'd offer to bolster that.
Thank you. That's that's a wonderful approach, and I'll be honest with you. This is one of those where I always enjoy it when I run one of these games and somebody, I wasn't expecting somebody to do that. So so that wasn't what I was expecting for the technology startup. I have to be honest with you, but it's one I'm very, very happy to see. So it's great. In fact, I'm going to make an additional suggestion after we're done here today. Just take it and run with the idea and actually make it happen for real, so to speak, because what you've described is something that is deeply needed, okay? So let me take a step back. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, look up challenge-based learning. Challenge-based learning is an approach that is woefully underused, even though it was heavily researched by the New Media Consortium and other groups as well. It was picked up by different groups to use, and yet it hasn't had the same type of presence in people's minds. And I think one of the things is that there's more pre-created content, more materials available for some other approaches. And in fact, I think this type of approach for this type of a tech startup could be incredibly valuable in terms of what it might do for creating this. So it's Digital Promise had it, of course, in their portfolio for a while, but again, it's this to me is an intriguing idea, and one that, as I say, was definitely not what I was expecting, but I'm very, very, very happy to see it. So this is also the type of thing that as you're thinking about partnerships, what type of entities can have partnerships with others? This is where you start to think about, well, what would this look like? How would this be different than traditional publishing houses or even entities? I know some of you have worked with or know the team that has done OER at Rice and other places, or teams, I should say, plural. But this would be a different beast. How would it look? What could it accomplish? Again, some very interesting possibilities here. So thank you. I think this is a wonderful one. And again, a wonderful one to have on the table as we go to the next stage of the game. So at this point, I want to thank you all for your work again. Don't forget that all of this material will be available to all of you. So if you have more questions, you're going to have the actual write-ups. You're going to have, I know as many people put their brainstorming, their Jamboards, etc., which is great, because that also tells you how the process happened, etc. So, here's what I'm going to suggest right now. We are possibly going to be seeing some people come in for part 2. So what I would like to do is suggest that we take a very brief stretch break, so to speak, before we go into Act 2, all right? I noticed, Angie, I noticed you have to leave, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So let's do the kind of, okay, stand up, take a deep breath, stretch. Can we run a little bit of music, maybe, Stephanie or Laura, for a couple of minutes? We need that ambiance. We need this before the Black Swans swoop in for Act 2.